you don't think of somebody successful. Homelessness is an easy example of someone who's not successful. If you think of somebody deported from the country, you don't think of somebody successful. That's pretty humiliating and an unsuccessful state to be. We wouldn't want to be in that state. When you think of poverty, you don't think of success. But if you look at some of the most successful human beings in history, guys, which game is it? Is it Mario? I mean, made it to the next level at least. Okay, so what was I saying? Something about Islam or something? Success and failure. Very good. Well, you have success in that level is good. Okay. So in any case, when we think about Ibrahim alayhi salam being made homeless because he was kicked out of his house, when we think of him as someone who's wandering the desert and going from town to town, not having any assets to his name, when we think of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam being expelled from Mecca, deported essentially, when we think of him living out of a cave for a good year, when we think of the bankruptcy of the companions, even the Messenger himself sallallahu alaihi wasallam tying stones to his belly, anybody else starving, anybody else, you walk down the street and somebody doesn't have a home, the picture in your mind is not success. Anybody else who's been kicked out of their home, you don't think of success. As a matter of fact, even about a previous prophet, people said, Kunta fina marjuwan. We used to have so much hopes in you. You had a bright future. What have you done with your future? You've become such a failure. They said to a prophet. You see? Because their definition of success still holds, and according to their definition, this is a huge failure. You'll find people in your own family, among your circle of friends. Maybe you're not that religious. Maybe you don't pray 5 times, or you don't know much about Islam, or you don't dress so Islamically, or whatever maybe. And you start maybe even learning a little bit about Islam, or just showing a little bit of curiosity about Islam. And people around you start thinking you're failing in life. You're not cool anymore. You've lost out on something. You've become weird. You're not as acceptable as you once were. There's some sort of a loss associated with coming close to Islam, even if a little bit. And the more they see you as serious about the religion, the more of a loser you are. The more of a loser you are. And that's the story of human history. The Prophet would tell us himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Bada al-Islamu ghariban, fasayaudu ghariban, fatuba lil-ghuraba. Islam began as something weird, something strange. People said, what do you mean this is success? What we've been doing is all failure, and what you've come with is success? Come on. This is what you mean? This is how you want us to live our life? And Allah says the Prophet says one day it will come back as something strange. In other words, when Islam first came, people of Makkah thought it was strange. It was weird. What are you talking about? But once Islam became a global power, it was the popular thing. It was the cool thing to be Muslim, actually, at one point, when the Muslims were in power. But now we find ourselves at a time where even within a Muslim family, somebody going back towards Islam is becoming what again? The strange one, the weird one. It's associated with some kind of loss. In many countries in the Muslim world, people are afraid that their young sons and daughters might become religious, because if they do, that means they won't get good jobs, they won't have good careers, they won't get a good education, they'll become fanatics, they'll become crazy. All these fears are there that they will lose out on life if they get close to Islam. And though at some level I sympathize with that fear, because there's a lot of fanaticism out there. There is. But to take all of Islam and say, if you become anywhere close to this deen, if I see you praying 5 times, or if I start noticing that you're not wearing the tight clothes that you once wore, and that's not a good thing. You're becoming too extreme, you're too hard on yourself, and you start seeing that you're missing out on life, or you're in a state of loss, then your definition of loss and failure is not based on Surah Al-Asr yet. That worldview hasn't been established. You see, Islam today has become a label. We carry the name, we carry Muslim names, we celebrate Eid, we show up for Jummah, we do certain rituals, like the Christians do their rituals, and the Jews do their rituals. They have their Sabbath, they have their Sunday, we have our Friday. We eat the halal food and we're good. Basically, Islam's become just a few things that we do, but practically, the way we see life, the way we view the world, has not changed at all, is not different from anybody else. They have certain definitions of success and failure, and ours are identical. We consider the very same thing, success and failure, as our non-Muslim colleagues. as our Christian, Jewish, atheist, Hindu, Buddhist, agnostic friends. They have that same view, we have that same view. We haven't actually seen the world any differently. Islam has been reduced to certain rituals, not a way of seeing the world. The Quran first came to change the way we see the world. Everything else is secondary. The primary is the way you see the world changes. That's the point of Surah Al-Asr. Its function is to make you see the world from the Quran's lens. That's what its purpose is. And I told you, at the end of the day, all it is one single sentence. Now, it looks like, you know, there's, in the second section is going to be the hardest for me to explain, but inshallah I'll do my best. Allah makes, and I'll translate briefly for you the surah, even though it won't be a good translation, but for the purpose of this discussion, at least because I'm saying it's just one statement, it shouldn't be so hard to translate. And it's a simple ayah. There's no difficult language in the ayat. Wal asr, Allah says, I swear by time as it's running out. I swear by time as it's running out. Innal insana lafi khusr. Hey child in the back, I'm distracted by you. Yeah, you.
Yeah, he agrees.
You with me? You need a hug? I'll give you a hug. I think he's okay now. Alright. Why is this partition? I can't see anything. This is probably why they're acting up.
That's a kids area.
Oh my god. That's good that we took a break right now, because anybody else want to take phone calls? Anybody else? Okay. Alright, I'm going to go back. Section 2 now. And this is one of the most difficult sections, and it might seem depressing. Bear with me. But before we do, let's translate the surah. I swear by time as it's running out. Allah says, no doubt every single human being is truly drowning in a state of loss. Truly drowning in great loss, you can even translate. خُسِرْ التَّنْوِينَ لِلتَّعْظِيمِ أو للتفخيم. With the exception of those who've believed, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, and with the exception of those who've done the few good deeds, I'm translating carefully now, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ, and those who counsel one another to the truth. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ, and counsel one another to patience, perseverance, consistency. Simple statement. I swear by time that's running out, human beings are drowning in loss, with the exception of those who believed, have done the few good deeds, have counseled one another to the truth, and counseled one another to patience and perseverance. This is the statement that we're talking about. Why is all of this one statement? When you say I swear by something, wal asr, when you take the oath, and we're not going ayah by ayah yet, but just an overview. When you just say I swear by time, you haven't said anything yet. That's just a way of mentally preparing you for what is to come. That's actually not a sentence in and of itself. It's a preparatory remark to prepare you for that sentence, to emphasize the sentence that's coming. So that sentence is, no doubt every human being is in a state of loss. Innal insana lafi khusr. The last ayah, illa alladhina, with the exception of those who believed. Well, an exception is not a sentence by itself. It's only an added clause to that central statement. What that means then is, the heart of this surah is one sentence, one ayah, the middle ayah. Innal insana lafi khusr. That's the thesis of this surah. The thesis of it is, no doubt about it, every single human being is drowning in loss. That's the thesis. That's a pretty dark thesis. Human beings are in loss. And as I studied it today, and this was past week, I started wondering if this is Allah's commentary about every single human being. Of course He makes exceptions by the end, but this is, if He's talking like this about every single human being, like there's no exception. What He's saying here applies to every single one of you, myself, Muslims, non-Muslims, all human beings that came before us, all that will come after us. Every single one of us, this applies. There are parts of Quran that apply to some people and not others. That happens. But this part of Quran applies to everyone without exception. I started wondering how Allah speaks about the human being all over the Quran. Because He's made this drastic statement. How has He used the word al-insan everywhere else in the Quran? And maybe that'll give us some insight into why He's saying what He's saying here. And what I discovered before I take you through this journey about the insan is that actually I'm convinced after doing this study, by the way, the word insan occurs in the Quran 56 times. And after doing this study, I can tell you, I'm convinced that every other place in the Quran where the human being is mentioned with the word al-insan is only further elaborating this ayah. It's actually only furthering the reality that is mentioned in Innal insana lafi khusr. This is the principal ayah under whose shade every other ayah that insan is mentioned in can be studied. It shapes our view and really puts in perspective every other ayah about the human being. Especially with the use of the same exact word, al-insan. Of course, al-bashar is used, nas is used, bani adam is used, other words are used also, but I'm specifically talking about what word? Al-insan. So I've broken this into categories. Like all those 56 ayat that I was referring to, I'm not going to go from 1 to 56, I've broken them up into groups. The first group of these ayat is, what they have in common is Allah describes what He made us from. What did He make us from? And I'll read them quickly to all of you and then comment on them. وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ صَلْصَالٍ مِنْ حَمَإٍ مَسْنُونٍ. We created the human being from dried up dirt that makes sound, and it's you can even say baked clay. خُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ وَخَلَقَ الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ نُطْفَةٍ فَإِذَا هُوَ خَصِيمٌ مُبِينٌ. He created the human being from a drop of fluid. And then all of a sudden he started making clear arguments and started debating, became argumentative. أَوَلَا يَذْكُرُ الْإِنسَانَ أَنَّا خَلَقْنَاهُ مِنْ قَبْلُ وَلَمْ يَكُ شَيْئًا. Doesn't the human being remember that we created him from we created him much before, and he used to be nothing, worthless. Now before he said, he talked about dirt and he talked about fluid, right? That's the two things he talked about. And now he combines both of them and says both of them were basically nothing. وَلَمْ يَكُ شَيْئًا. He was nothing, he was worthless. Who thinks of a drop as worth anything? Who thinks of a piece of dirt on the ground as worth anything? You're nothing. It's insignificant. You were insignificant. وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ سُلَالَةٍ مِنْ طِينٍ. Again, once again, baked or muddy portions of clay. الَّذِي أَحْسَنَ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ خَلْقَهُ وَبَدَأَ خَلْقَ الْإِنسَانِ مِنْ طِينٍ. The one who made everything beautiful and started the creation of the human being with dirt. What that means here is actually Allah makes everything beautiful. He even took something ugly like dirt and made something beautiful like the human being. That's what He means here. فَلْيَنْظُرِ الْإِنسَانُ مِمَّا خُلِقَ مِنْ مَاءٍ دَافِقٍ يَخْرُجُ مِنْ بَيْنِ الصُّلْبِ وَالتَّرَائِبِ. The human being should take a good look. What was he made from? A fluid that jumps out, that comes from between a sulb wa tara'ib. He's referring to now, the fluid that doesn't have to be mentioned. You all know what he's referring to. خَلَقَ الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ صَلْصَالٍ كَالْفَخَّارِ. He made the human being from dried up dirt, the one that's used like pottery. When you have pottery, those of you that come from like Pakistan or traditional, like Morocco or other traditional societies where you have clay goods in the kitchen, when it breaks and it just cracks, you can't use that clay again. It's already been baked, right? That's useless. That's actually called fakhar. صلصال كالفخار. Then he says, هل أتى على الإنسان حين من الدهر لم يكن شيئا مذكورا. Was there ever a time that passed over in the ages of humanity? Was there ever a time where you used to be something not even worth mentioning? إنا خلقنا الإنسان من نطفة أمشاج نبتليه. We created the human being from a single drop that jumps out, that we put to the test. Meaning that sperm, as it's traveling through all the way to make it to the egg for the pregnancy, it's fighting against millions of other competitors. Nabtalihi actually means we put it to the test, put him to the, not nabtaliha, not the nutfa, the insan himself. That was me. That one fluid that is embarrassing to mention was myself, being put to the test inside the body of my mother. That's what was happening. فَجَعَلْنَاهُ سَمِيعًا بَصِيرًا. And from there we evolved him into something who can hear and someone who can see. أَوَلَمْ يَرَ الْإِنسَانَ أَنَّا خَلَقْنَاهُ مِنْ نُطْفَةٍ فَإِذَا هُوَ خَصِيمٌ مُبِينٌ. خَلَقَ الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ عَلَقٍ. He created the human being from a hanging piece of flesh, meaning the early pregnancy of a woman. And so finally he says, يَا أَيُّهَا الْإِنسَانَ مَا غَرَّكَ بِرَبِّكَ الْكَرِيمِ. Human being, what deceived you? What was so deceptive that it distracted you and took you away from your master who was generous to you? الَّذِي خَلَقَكَ فَسَوَّاكَ فَعَدَلَكَ. The one who made you, molded you into this incredible creature, the human being, balanced you out. فِي أَيِّ سُورَةٍ مَا شَاءَ رَكَّبَكَ. Now in these ayat, all of them, what do we have in common? We have in common that we're made of two things. What two things are they? Dirt and fluid. Those are the two things. But let's take a step further. How does Allah describe that fluid? He says, مَاءٍ بِمَاءٍ مِّن مَاءٍ مَهِينٍ. Humiliated fluid. Embarrassing fluid. Our origin is humiliation. Our origin has something that has no dignity. It's embarrassing. It's something to hide. It's something to be ashamed of. That's the first origin. The second origin is what? Even before then? kaltin, or salsal, or kalfakha, dirt. Basically dirt. The thing about dirt in every literature, including the Arabic language, is dirt is associated with failure. يدسه من تراب وقد خاب من دساها يتيما مسكينا ذا متربة. Turab, to be in the dirt, to be covered in dirt, to be covered in dust, this is the idea of someone who has nothing, who's a failure. Even today, if somebody's living on the dirt, all they have to their name is dirt, then they're a failure. When the farm doesn't grow, it's just a patch of dirt, it's worthless. It's only when it grows life, then it's success, when the dirt is covered. But dirt on its own is worthless. So Allah Azza wa Jal describes our origins are so humble and so worthless. But why does He talk about it over and over? You know why He talks about it? And every section I mention goes back to the same idea. Human beings are in loss. How do we learn human beings are in loss? Allah in all of these ayat, you know the point He keeps making? I made you from such embarrassing and worthless origins, and yet you are so full of yourself. You are khasim, argumentative. You're mustakbir, you're arrogant. You forget where you were made, what you were made from. You forget your origins. You don't realize, you become ungrateful and feel entitled. How are you entitled? You're just a piece of dirt. What do you have rights to? How do you have, look, innaka antal azizul kareem, you are dignified, noble. What nobility? What's your worth? Your worth before Allah. We may have dignity with each other, but before Allah, what dignity do we have? Well, how did He make us? What did He make us from? We forget this origin. And so the first source of our loss is that you and I forget our humble beginnings. We forget. And when we forget, we're no longer grateful to Allah. We become entitled. We become argumentative. We don't know our place. I'm reminded one time I was at a gathering. It was a really awkward meeting. I had a meeting with somebody, I won't name the people. It was in a Muslim country. And the person who invited us for dinner was a billionaire. He was a very wealthy fellow, one of the wealthiest in the Muslim world. And we had dinner with him. And we're sitting there, and one of my students, who's a teenager, also kind of made friends with one of his kids at a program, and he got invited too. So I said, okay, you can come along too. So we're sitting there at this dinner, and this person is there, and he's obviously a VIP. He's meeting with presidents and other executives or whatever, and he's made time to meet with us just to chat with us or whatever. And my student, who's like 14 years old, is sitting there, and he's talking to this VIP, and he says, so, what do you do? Because I just, here and there. He goes, oh, okay. I guess not much then. And I was just sitting there just staring. I wasn't embarrassed, I was just baffled. How someone cannot know their place. First of all, it doesn't matter if he's a billionaire, he's a lot older than you. You don't talk like that. But sometimes we don't know our place. People speak out of line. Imagine us as human beings living out of line. Not speaking out of line, just living out of line. Not knowing our place, I want to give you another example of why is it important to remember our origins? Why does Allah keep reminding us, I made you from, He could have said it once, right? I made you from dirt, done. You came from fluid. He didn't even have to say it, we know. We know. That's what we get reduced to anyway when our bodies decay. It's not a new bit of information. But somehow Allah feels it necessary to remind and remind and remind and remind over and over again. Why is that? I want you to imagine a scenario where you wake up tomorrow and the only memory you have is the last 24 hours, and that's it. You know nothing else. You basically know your name, possibly know your address, but where did you grow up, who your parents are, what your life is like, what your career is, nothing. You remember nothing. If someone doesn't know where they came from, they have no sense of direction. Isn't that the case? They don't know what to do with their life. Maybe when they remembered, they had a purpose. But when they don't remember, I'm a student, I have an exam today. I'm a doctor, I have surgery to go to. I have parents I have to take care of. When you forget your past, you forget all of your responsibilities, and you've basically ruined your future. You can't do anything for your future because you've forgotten your past. Allah keeps reminding us of our past. Why? So we don't ruin our future. So we don't lose sight of our future. This is the reason we've been reminded over and over and over again. We have no way of preparing for what lies ahead if that's not there. Okay, so now inshallah, I want to take you to the next set of ayat. Now this is where things get really weird. Not weird, but depressing. I felt depressed after studying this. Allah gave us certain weaknesses. Human beings were purposely made imperfect. And before I share this with you, the depressing side, I want to give you the positive first. Allah Azza wa Jal created everything else, and it does what Allah says. The skies, the earth, the angels. وَنَحْنُ نُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِكَ وَنُقَدِّسُ لَكَ. Allah's plan was to create everything, and everything is in complete obedience to Him. But Allah decided to this incredible experiment, which is the human being, He handed him something that really nobody else like us has. And He handed us, He made a flawed creature. He made someone about whom the Prophet ﷺ says, كُلُّ بَنِي آدَمْ خَطَّاءٌ. Every single of the children of Adam continuously make mistakes. Not khati'un, khatta'un. They repeatedly make mistakes. They keep on making mistakes. We're just flawed. We keep making mistakes. We have weaknesses. We're not perfect. We have flaws. We have, even among the Muslims, Allah Azza wa Jalla describes, on Judgment Day, Allah will remove the ill feelings they had towards one another. وَنَزَعْنَا مَا فِي قُلُوبِهِم مِّن غِلٍّ. They had it. There was tension between them too. And Allah will remove it. Because even if you're Muslim, you can have tension with another Muslim. It's not perfect. وَإِن طَائِفَتَانِ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ اقْتَتَلُوا. The scenarios happen. Allah Azza wa Jalla will now, I'll walk you through ayat where Allah describes some weaknesses, some limitations that were put in all of us. We were programmed this way, and these ayat have the word khalq in them, khalaqa in them, or khuliqa in them, meaning we were made this way, or Allah made us this way. The first of them in Surah An-Nisa, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ أَن يُخَفِّفَ عَنْكُمْ وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا. Allah wants to lighten your burden while the human being was made weak. Now if someone is weak, then their chances of failure are high, aren't they? Because if someone is strong, we're studying إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. And if someone is weak, then it's like they're set up for what? Failure. But understand the ayah properly. Allah Azza wa Jalla is saying, Allah gave you these laws, these commandments. That's the context of the ayah. Allah is giving you these commandments so He can make your life easier and lighten your burden. The laws of Islam, their purpose is actually not to make your life tougher, but to remove burdens from you. When you accept them, then other pressures will go away from you. By the way, just on a side note, Surah Al-Asr itself takes a lot of pressure off. When your definition of success becomes like nobody else's, you're not struggling to be like everybody else. You're not depressed that everybody else is getting ahead in some other thing and you're not, because you're no longer comparing to that standard of success. Your standard has changed. You know, you're no longer in the rat race, as you will, if you will, right? So here Allah says, Allah wants to lighten your burden by His laws, and then He says the human being was made weak, which means I gave you laws knowing that you're weak so that you can handle the ones I gave you. I didn't give you tougher laws than you can handle. But it also means you tend to think that the laws I gave you, that Allah gave you, make your life not easier, but they make them harder, and that's your weakness. You're too weak to see the bigger picture. Unfortunately, you run away from Allah's law because you think if you follow it, things are going to get tougher, while Allah is telling you it's going to make life easier, but you're too weak to understand that. You have this tendency of being weak. And by the way, every time Allah mentions a weakness that He put inside of us, He mentions a way to fix it. It wouldn't be fair if Allah just said, you're made weak, what can we do? Then we could say, Ya Allah, you made me weak. That's why I'm in khusr. You know? Here Allah Azza wa Jal, you know, our weakness is remedied by our study and our reflection on Allah's words. Through our reflection, we'll learn Allah is actually making things easy for us. Through Quran, Allah says, مَا قَدَرُ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا قَوِيٌّ عَزِيزٌ. Before He says, ضَعُفَ الطَّالِبُ وَالْمَطْلُوبُ. Then He says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَقَوِيٌّ عَزِيزٌ. Human beings are weak, but when they start to appreciate Allah, they start becoming stronger themselves. Now, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ خُلِقَ هَلُوعًا إِذَا مَسَّهُ الشَّرُّ جَزُوعًا وَإِذَا مَسَّهُ الْخَيْرُ مَنُوعًا. The human being was created extremely, extremely greedy. and too excited to get into things immediately. Qillatu sabr. He doesn't have any patience. He just wants things right away. If he's got a problem, she's got a problem, we want the problem gone now. If they're hungry, they want the food now. If they're poor, they want the job now. Everything needs to be solved immediately. And every time something good happens, then they're really happy. But if something bad happens, they lose all hope. It's over. This is a tendency you have, and you were made this way. You were made reactionary, Allah says. You were made, you lose it. You panic when things go wrong. And if Allah says, this is my tendency, this is what I tend to become, panicky and reactionary and not having any patience and not being able to withhold myself, losing it every time something bad happens, or even when something good happens, I just go crazy, start partying too much. Then if I'm programmed this way, then it's not my fault, except Allah gave you a way to control it. إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ خُلِقَ هَلُوعًا إِذَا مَسَّهُ الشَّرُّ جَزُوعًا وَإِذَا مَسَّهُ الْخَيْرُ مَنُوعًا. And by the way, when good happens, He keeps people from getting the good. Manu'a. He says, by the way, this is you were made this way, but then you were given a remedy to fix that. إِلَّا الْمُصَلِّينَ. Except the people who pray. And the people who pray consistently. When you pray consistently, you don't just gain control over your time, you also gain control over this tendency, Allah says. So He mentions the weakness, and He mentions what we can do for it. خَلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ مِنْ عَجَلٍ. He then says human beings were made with a sense of urgency. We want things quickly. We don't want to wait. I would rather work overtime to pay off. I would rather do extra to get that extra money sooner rather than later. Everything I want now. The guy is engaged, he wants to get married tomorrow, not 3 months from now. Everything we want fast. We don't want to wait. You got your kids married, now you keep telling them, when you having a baby, when you having a baby, when you having a baby, they're like, it's been 2 months, can we relax a little bit? When are you going to give me a grandkid? When are you going to give me a grandkid? Okay, now they don't even come over because you keep telling them, give me a grandkid. That's their decision, leave them alone. But we want things quickly, immediately. Then you get, your son started a career, or your children are living in an apartment. When are you buying a house? When are you buying a house? When are you buying a house? You know? Rush. Oh, in everything. Min ajal. Sa'urikum ayati fala tasta'jilu. I'll show you my signs. Don't rush. And this is actually a critical ayah when Allah mentions that human beings have the tendency to rush. And even the Prophet ﷺ wanted to rush the entire Quran into him. La tuharrik bihi lisanaka lita'jala bihi. And so Allah says, what's the remedy? Inna alayna jam'ahu wa qur'anahu fa idha qara'nahu fattabi' qur'anahu. Some things Allah decided that they will come in their course. So even if the Prophet is being told, even though you want something good, the Quran, it will come when Allah decides. One internalizes that some things will come when Allah plans, and you become happy with Allah's plan. This is another human tendency. Then there are, I'll move forward with these tendencies, the ones we were made with. He says, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. We made the human being drowning, just like in loss. The human being is in loss, but this is different. We made the human being drowning in toil, stress, labor, difficulty, sadness. What does that mean? There's some of us are poor, and we have to break our backs to earn a living, just to survive. Constant labor. And the only time we're not laboring is when we're passed out. The farmer's working through the burning heat all day, and then he's knocked out like you couldn't wake him up if, other than the sur, I don't know what else can wake him up. He's gone for the day. But then you have someone on the other side who's a millionaire. House, car, money, savings, everything is there. But he's got mental strain. He's also exhausted, but not physically, but how? Mentally. Stress, investments, family, children, whatever other issues. The farmer has physical exhaustion, this one has mental, but everybody's exhausted. Nobody escapes the exhaustion. This one is physically relaxed, sitting in the air conditioner, that one's physically abused under the sun. But this one can sleep without any pills, no antidepressants, no nothing. This one has to stay up all night and OD on stuff to get some sleep. They have a different kind of kabad, but every human being has kabad. Every human being is going to be, Allah put us in a state of toil and labor and stress. So when you and I start thinking that one day there's not going to be any stress.
وأجتاز السماء جلالا فأزيد أسراب الغيوم جمالا وألون الدنيا بأجمل بسمة وأكون للخير العميم